the poorest and fairest president of Uruguay, Jose Alberto, his life and everything about him. Part 4. We continue to tell a stage of the life of the president of Uruguay, Jose Alberto, his life and everything about him. Uruguay's Jose Mujica lives in a tiny house rather than the presidential palace, and gives away 90% of his salary. He's legalized marijuana and gay marriage. But his greatest legacy is governing without giving up his revolutionary ideals. Giles Tremlett, Thursday the 18th of September 2014, 6 o'clock British Summertime, last modified on Thursday the 30th of November 2017, 8:43 Greenwich Mean Time, 241. Emo Manis was just 16 when he met Uruguay's current president, Jose Mujica. On a spring day in 1969, Manis was at home alone with his sister, Beatriz, when the future president burst out of the lift outside their penthouse in Montevideo with a pistol in his hand. "Turn around, shut your mouth, and keep your hands above your head," he barked. Manis immediately recognized the pinched eyes and thick, wavy brown hair of one of the most notorious members of the daring, violent Tupamaro guerrillas. After his initial sense of panic subsided, he recalled, he felt strangely calm. "I remember telling the young gunman who was with him not to worry, that I wasn't going to do anything," the 62-year-old travel agent told me when we met in his favorite Montevideo bookshop, a short distance from the murky waters of the immense River Plate. Sister, who suffered from polio and used a wheelchair, was taken off to another room. "Don't worry, Viejita," Mujica told her, "you'll be fine. This has nothing to do with you." The colloquial, affectionate Viejita, little old lady, was a typical Mujica touch. Manis's stepfather, Jose Pedro Purpura, was a notorious judge, with ties to Uruguay's far right and a stock of pistols. After the gang had left, taking documents and weapons, Manis told his relatives that he was only upset that the Tupamaros had stolen a typewriter he used for his schoolwork. The following day, the phone rang. "It is us, the same people from yesterday," a voice said. He suddenly felt scared again. Somehow they knew about the typewriter. If he wanted it back, the voice told him, he could find it in the lobby of a nearby building. Sure enough, it was there, he said. They had left a typed message in it for my stepfather. "Careful, doctor," it read. "We are watching you." The following year, a Tupamaro unit sprayed their building with machine gun fire in an attempt to assassinate Dr. Purpura. 5 years ago, in Uruguay's last presidential election, Manis cast his vote for Mujica and his Broad Front Party, a coalition of left-wingers that first displaced the dominant Colorado and National parties in 2005, with the election of Mujica's moderate predecessor, Tabaré Vázquez. "I might be expected to feel bitter about him," Manis told me. "But he is the only one who practices what he preaches." A former revolutionary who still professes anarchist ideals has run Uruguay's government and its booming economy ever since. Mujica remains popular, but presidents cannot serve consecutive terms. The next election, on the 26th of October, will nevertheless represent a referendum on his pragmatic left-wing government. "I'm an old man made of flesh and bones, with nerves and a heart. I put my foot in it a lot, but always in good faith." He has gained international renown as a truculent truth speaker. Speeches lambasting rampant consumerism at the Rio+20 conference in 2012, and at the United Nations in New York the following year, have garnered 3 million YouTube views. What would happen to this planet if Indians had the same number of cars per family as in Germany? He asked the audience in Rio. How much oxygen would be left? At the UN, he told the delegates to stop going to wasteful, expensive summits that achieve nothing. Some call him Latin America's Nelson Mandela, recalling his 13 years in jail. Others see a groundbreaking social liberal, who has introduced the world's most innovative cannabis legislation as well as gay marriage and legal abortion. Mostly, though, he is famous for the way he lives. The man who most Uruguayans call El Pepe drives a 25-year-old Volkswagen Beetle, lives in a tiny house on a rural smallholding, and gives away 90% of his salary. His deliberately coarse but pragmatic style delights Uruguay's poor, but also works for part of its middle classes, a trick that other populist Latin American leaders, invoking the great liberator Simón Bolívar, have conspicuously failed to turn. His critics claim that Mujica is more style than substance, a charming old man who put aside both his gun and his revolutionary ideals. In a continent that has become the world's biggest laboratory for alternative left-wing regimes, each claiming to have found the magic formula, many still cannot decide whether he is a hero or a sellout. In the summer of 1969, a police officer knocked on the door of a small Montevideo investment bank, which was partially owned by a government minister. The employees let him in, only to discover he was a Tupamaro. Several other guerrillas followed. They took the equivalent of $100,000 in today's money, but also demanded the bank's account ledgers. One of the employees, Lucia Topolansky, had tipped off the Tupas that the bank was doing illegal currency deals. Her twin sister, Maria Elia, was one of the guerrillas who conducted the raid. The Tupamaros dropped off the ledgers at the home of a public prosecutor, and some of those involved in the illegal trading were subsequently jailed. It was an example of their trademark armed propaganda style. Violence was fine, but best when proven to do good. The Topolansky sisters were from a well-off family in the upmarket Pocitos district. Uruguay has riquillos, not ricos. People who are well-off, not rich, Lucia told me in her office at the parliament in Montevideo, where she is now the senior senator. Silver-haired with beaming brown eyes, she has a remodeled nose given to her by a Tupamaro surgeon who tried to change her appearance after she broke out of jail. She married Mujica in 2005, after 20 years of living together and 13 years of separation, when they were imprisoned in separate jails. When he became president, it was her task to swear him in. The army regiment that had arrested both of us stands guard at the Legislative Assembly building, she said. Our friends were there, laughing and shouting. It's about time they honored you. Topolansky's girlhood nickname was La Flaca, the skinny one, but the Tupamaros called her La Tronca, the log, because she was so tough. Mujica was raised by a similarly strong-willed woman, his mother, Doña Lucy. His father died in 1943, when Mujica was only 8. Soon he was delivering for a local bakery in the semi-rural Paso de la Arena neighborhood, and selling arum lilies cropped from the creek behind their house to help the family make ends meet. Uruguay had a dazzling start to the 20th century, sending wool and beef to hungry, war-torn Europe. By 1930, it was one of the world's dozen wealthiest nations by per capita income. Tiny Uruguay enjoyed enlightened social legislation, with 8-hour working days and maternity leave. Some called it the Switzerland of Latin America. It even won the World Cup in 1930 and 1950, though its population has never gone above 3.5 million. But as Mujica grew up, the miracle began to collapse. As a young man, Mujica went to work for Enrique Uro, a popular left-wing politician, but had a political epiphany when he met Che Guevara in post-revolutionary Cuba. As much of Latin America fell victim to crisis and decline, it was a Uruguayan writer, Eduardo Galeano, who penned a new Bible for the continent's left wing, The Open Veins of Latin America. The human murder by poverty in Latin America is secret, Galeano wrote, in 1971. Every year, without making a sound, 3 Hiroshima bombs explode over communities that have become accustomed to suffering with clenched teeth. With Uruguay suffering rampant inflation and a stagnant economy, Mujica and his comrades decided to follow Cuba's example, destroying the old order and trying something new, though it was never clear what that should be. Uruguay had no mountains to hide in, with the city of Montevideo dominating a fertile plain full of sheep and white-faced Hereford cattle, so they became urban guerrillas, taking their name from an 18th-century Peruvian rebel, Tupac Amaru II. The Tupamaros were a broad movement. One section was led by a priest, and unafraid of experiments, even costly ones. Trial and error, rather than dogma, would mark their history. It still does. They soon gained a reputation for daring theatrics. A raid on the town of Pondo saw them ride down the main street disguised as a funeral procession. After a heist at the Casino San Rafael in Punta del Este, a plush resort town, they sent back the employees' pool of tips. Time magazine dubbed them the Robin Hood guerrillas. But people with guns end up using them. 6 people died in the Pondo raid. In March 1970, Mujica was identified by a policeman in a bar. El Pepe drew his pistol, 2 police officers were wounded, and Mujica was shot 6 times. He was sent to Punta Carretas jail, which would later be turned into a glitzy mall looking out over the River Plate from Montevideo's southernmost point. Mujica broke out of it twice. Impressionable teenagers like Manis joined student demonstrations, hurling stones at the police as protests spread across what had long been regarded as the region's most tranquil and moderate country. Then it all went wrong. Kidnappings, bombings, and cold-blooded executions left the Tupamaros' romantic reputation in tatters. The army was called in and, in under a year, the Tupas were annihilated. Mujica was one of the last to be caught, in August 1972, while sleeping rough with an Uzi machine gun and a grenade under his coat. In June 1973, an authoritarian cattle rancher president, Juan Maria Bordaberry of the Colorado Party, led a civilian military coup, closing down democracy. Many blamed the Tupamaros. 9 Tupamaro leaders were removed from their prison cells and sent to army camps as hostages, to be killed if the group sprung back to life. The poet, novelist, and playwright Mauricio Rosenkopf spent 11 years in a tiny cell next to Mujica. For many years, Rosenkopf told me, the hostages could only communicate by tapping Morse code on their cell walls. Allowed to use the toilet just once a day, they urinated into their water bottles, allowing the sediment to settle and drinking the rest, because water was also scarce. Allowed to use the toilet just once a day, they urinated into their water bottles, allowing the sediment to settle and drinking the rest, because water was also scarce. It was even worse for Mujica, whose bullet wounds had seriously damaged his guts. Solitary confinement drove them half mad. Pepe became convinced that a bugging device was hidden in the ceiling. Its imaginary static deafened him. He would put stones in his mouth to stop himself from screaming, Rosenkopf, now 81, told me. Mujica fought to obtain the one item he needed most, a potty. Hostages were allowed occasional family visits, so Doña Lucy brought him one, but the guards refused to give it to him. One day, when his jailers held a party, Mujica began to scream for it. The commandant, embarrassed in front of his guests, relented. Mujica clung to his sole possession, a symbol of victory over his jailers, each time they were moved to a new army camp. He refused to scrub it clean, Rosenkopf recalled. We all have ticks left from that time. When Pepe came out, he came with all that baggage. The main road leading out of Montevideo towards Mujica's chacra, or smallholding, takes you through industrial suburbs, over a polluted river and past flat expanses of small, squat homes. They are poor, but not decrepit. There are relatively few signs of the aching poverty that afflicts other parts of Latin America, though a developing world debt crisis drove many to penury at the beginning of this century. Old nags are tethered to the roadside, nibbling at the wide green verges. A rough, hand-painted sign on a tin shack beside a potholed asphalt road points to the dirt track leading to the farm. An excited pack of dogs rushes out to meet visitors, then rushes back to chase a van delivering gas bottles. Cocks crow and partridges strut through nearby fields, food for stealthy farm cats. Men in white rubber boots cut chard in a field belonging to the farm. Mujica emerged from his tiny house dressed in a fawn fleece and gray trousers with sandals over socked feet. The fleece is an improvement, which can be credited to his 2009 campaign team, who weaned him off tattered jumpers. Age has made his features both more pinched around the eyes and fleshier around the edges. His thick shock of graying hair was neatly brushed, another habit he acquired while running for president. Manuela, a 3-legged mutt, hopped gamely along. The one-story house lies half hidden by greenery, its corrugated metal roof resting on pillars around a narrow, cement walkway full of dusty crates and jars. Winter rain had highlighted the patchy plasterwork. Mind the mud, the president warned by way of greeting. The narrow, elongated front room contains a cheap office chair and desk, bookshelves, a small table with 2 uncomfortable wood-backed chairs, a roaring log stove and an ancient, immaculately restored Peugeot bicycle. I've had that bicycle for 60 years, he said proudly, recalling his days as an amateur racer. The other 2 rooms in the house are familiar to Uruguayans, who have seen them on YouTube. The president once showed a Korean television team his roughly made bed and the contents of an old refrigerator before inviting them to shots of Johnny Walker and Uruguayan cane spirit. Cobwebs, heavy with dead flies, hung above our heads. Mujica sat stiff-legged on the office chair, easing his joints and ready for verbal combat. Mujica could live in the presidential palace, a 100-year-old mansion in the Old Money Prado district, but he would rather be here. We think of it as a way of fighting for our personal freedom, he said. If you complicate your life too much in the material sense, a big part of your time goes to tending that. That's why we still live today as we did 40 years ago, in the same neighborhood, with the same people and the same things. You don't stop being a common man just because you are president. Mujica has a mouth to match his rusticity. At a speech to trade unionists in Montevideo the previous day, the audience hung on for the quick-fire, crude phrases that he claims to have picked up in jail. Es la joda. What the fuck? Provoked a squawk of delight from a woman behind me. I know what our people are like, Mujica told me. Some more cultivated people have a stereotype and think El Señor Presidente has to be like a statue, totally inert. He cannot be like any other person. But I am an old man made of flesh and bones, with nerves and a heart. Yes, I put my foot in it a lot, but always in good faith. It was even worse for Mujica. They urinated into their water bottles, allowing the sediment to settle and drinking the rest, because water was also scarce. It was even worse for Mujica, whose bullet wounds had seriously damaged his guts. Solitary confinement drove them half mad. Pepe became convinced that a bugging device was hidden in the ceiling. Its imaginary static deafened him. He would put stones in his mouth to stop himself from screaming. Rosenkopf, now 81, told me, old nags are tethered to the roadside, nibbling at the wide green verges. A rough, hand-painted sign on a tin shack beside a potholed asphalt road points to the dirt track leading to the farm. An excited pack of dogs rushes out to meet visitors, then rushes back to chase a van delivering gas bottles. Cocks crow and partridges strut through nearby fields, food for stealthy farm cats. Men in white rubber boots cut chard in a field belonging to the farm. Mujica fought to obtain the one item he needed most, a potty. Hostages were allowed occasional family visits, so Doña Lucy brought him one, but the guards refused to give it to him. One day, when his jailers held a party, Mujica began to scream for it. The commandant, embarrassed in front of his guests, relented. Mujica clung to his sole possession, a symbol of victory over his jailers, each time they were moved to a new army camp. He refused to scrub it clean, Rosenkopf recalled. We all have ticks left from that time. When Pepe came out, he came with all that baggage. The main road leading out of Montevideo towards Mujica's chacra, or smallholding, takes you through industrial suburbs, over a polluted river and past flat expanses of small, squat homes. They are poor, but not decrepit. There are relatively few signs of the aching poverty that afflicts other parts of Latin America, though a developing world debt crisis drove many to penury at the beginning of this century. I stop at this point today. Until next time, stay curious. Stay informed, and keep exploring the world's incredible stories. Soon we will publish Part 5. Thank you for watching.